The whistle of a bitter Montana wind cut through the silence as Francine Dawson huddled against the trunk of a cottonwood tree, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on her arm. The stagecoach robbery had left her stranded in the wilderness with nothing but the tattered remains of her traveling dress and a determination to survive that burned fiercer than her pain. It was 1878, and the promise of a teaching position in Helena had drawn her west from Boston. Now, as darkness crept across the horizon and the temperature plummeted, that dream seemed as distant as the life she had left behind. Francine forced herself to her feet, clutching her wounded arm. The bandits had taken everything: her trunk, her money, even her coat. The driver and guard lay dead back at the ambush site, and she had fled into the wilderness when the outlaws began arguing over who would have her first. For hours she had walked, following what she hoped was the direction of the nearest settlement. But as the daylight faded, so did her certainty and her strength. A wolf howled in the distance, the sound sending chills through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She needed shelter, and soon. The stories of freezing to death in Montana's unforgiving landscape were not mere cautionary tales. They were the reality she now faced. Francine stumbled forward, her breathing ragged. The trees had thinned, revealing rolling hills and a distant smudge of smoke against the darkening sky. Hope flared in her chest. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people. She pushed on, each step a battle against exhaustion and pain. The wound on her arm throbbed, but she feared stopping. Night was coming, and with it predators both animal and human. The smoke grew more distinct as she crested a small rise. Below her lay a small cabin nestled against the base of a larger hill, light flickering from its single window. A rough corral stood nearby, housing a pair of horses that lifted their heads at her approach. Relief flooded through her, but caution tempered her joy. Who occupied the cabin? Would they offer help, or would she be trading one danger for another? The decision was made for her when her legs finally gave way. She collapsed to her knees, a small cry escaping her lips as she jarred her wounded arm. The cabin door swung open, spilling golden lamplight onto the packed earth outside. A tall figure emerged, the silhouette of a rifle clearly visible in his hands. "Who's there?" The voice was deep, rough with disuse. "Show yourself." Francine tried to stand but couldn't summon the strength. "Help," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please." The figure stepped forward cautiously, rifle still raised. As he drew closer, Francine could make out the features of a man weathered by sun and hardship. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, and beneath the brim of his hat, keen eyes assessed her with suspicion that gradually gave way to concern. "You're hurt," he said, lowering the rifle. He approached slowly, as if afraid she might bolt like a spooked deer. "Stagecoach. Robbed," Francine gasped. "They killed everyone else." The man knelt beside her, his movements careful as he examined the blood-soaked sleeve of her dress. "That needs tending." He hesitated, then set the rifle aside. "Can you stand?" She tried again but shook her head, defeated. Without another word, he slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. The sudden closeness to another human after hours of terrified solitude overwhelmed her, and Francine found herself clutching at the rough fabric of his shirt. "I haven't held a woman in 20 years, the cowboy whispered as he lifted her into his cabin. There was no impropriety in his tone, only a sad wonder, as if he had forgotten the simple human connection of touch. The cabin's interior was sparse but neat. A fire crackled in a small stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a table and 2 chairs against another. Shelves held books more than Francine would have expected and basic provisions. He placed her gently on the bed, then moved to stoke the fire. "Name's Lucas Blackwood," he said, his back to her. "This is my place. You're safe here." "Francine Dawson," she replied, her voice steadier now that she was out of the cold. "I was on my way to Helena. I'm to be the new schoolteacher there." Lucas turned, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Helena's still 3 days' ride from here." He moved to a trunk at the foot of the bed and withdrew a small box. "Need to see that arm." Francine hesitated, then nodded. Propriety seemed a distant concern compared to the throbbing pain. Lucas approached with a basin of water and clean cloths. His hands were large and calloused but surprisingly gentle as he rolled up her torn sleeve. The wound was an angry gash where a bullet had grazed her upper arm. "You're lucky," he said, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. "Bullet just took some skin. No need for digging lead out." Francine bit her lip against the sting. "You seem experienced with bullet wounds." Something dark flickered across his face. "War teaches a man things he'd rather not know." He didn't elaborate, and Francine didn't press. As Lucas bandaged her arm, Francine studied him more carefully. Despite the beard and weathered appearance, she guessed him to be in his mid-40s. His hair, visible beneath his hat, was dark with threads of silver at the temples. His movements were precise, economical, a man used to managing alone. "Thank you," she said when he finished. "I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't found your cabin." Lucas stood, returning items to the medical box. "Nothing good. Temperatures dropping fast. Spring in Montana's deceptive, can kill you quick as winter sometimes." He paused. "You need food and rest. I'll make something." He moved to the small cast iron stove, his back once again to her as he worked. Francine took the opportunity to examine her surroundings more thoroughly. Despite its simplicity, the cabin showed signs of care: hand-carved furniture, shelves of books, a colorful quilt on the bed where she sat. It wasn't the dwelling of a man who had given up, but of one who had withdrawn. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, breaking the silence. Lucas didn't turn from his task. "Since '58. Came west after the war. Wanted space and quiet." "You certainly found it," Francine observed. "Is there a town nearby?" "Silver Creek. About 15 miles south." He set a steaming bowl before her. "It's not much. Stew from yesterday." The smell made Francine's stomach clench with hunger. "It smells wonderful." She accepted the spoon he offered and began to eat, suddenly ravenous. Lucas sat at the table, watching her with an expression that mingled concern and curiosity. "Those men who attacked your stage, did you see their faces?" Francine nodded, swallowing. 3 of them. One had a scar across his cheek. Another was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. The third was younger, barely more than a boy. Lucas's expression hardened. "Sounds like the Rollins gang. They've been hitting stages between here and Helena for months now." He rose and moved to the window, lifting the edge of a curtain to peer into the darkness. "They don't usually leave witnesses." A chill that had nothing to do with her wound ran through Francine. "Do you think they followed me?" Lucas let the curtain fall back into place. "Not tonight. Too dark, and a storm's moving in. But they might come looking once they realize someone got away." He turned to face her. "We'll need to get you to Silver Creek when you're stronger. Sheriff there can arrange an escort to Helena." "How long?" Francine asked, setting aside the now empty bowl. "Your arm needs a few days. And there's the storm." As if to emphasize his point, wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters. "Could be 4, 5 days before it's safe to travel." The reality of her situation settled over Francine. 5 days in this isolated cabin with a man she had just met, a man who by his own admission had been apart from society for decades. In Boston, such an arrangement would be beyond scandalous. But this wasn't Boston, and Lucas Blackwood, for all his gruff manner, had shown her nothing but kindness. "I've imposed on you enough," she said. "I can sleep by the fire. The bed is yours." Lucas shook his head. "You take the bed. I've slept on worse than a cabin floor." His tone brooked no argument, and Francine was too exhausted to insist. He provided her with a long shirt his own. She presumed for sleeping, and turned his back while she changed behind a screen he had set up for privacy. The garment reached nearly to her ankles, swallowing her slender frame. When she emerged, Lucas had arranged blankets near the fire for himself. He added wood to the flames, ensuring the cabin would stay warm through the night. "If you need anything, I'm right here," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Try to rest. Your body needs to heal." Francine climbed into the bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. The mattress was stuffed with straw but was far more comfortable than the ground would have been. "Mr. Blackwood," she said softly as he prepared to settle on his makeshift bed. "Thank you. Not many would have taken in a stranger this way." In the firelight, his expression softened momentarily. "Out here, refusing help is the same as murder. Get some sleep, Miss Dawson." As exhaustion claimed her, Francine's last conscious thought was that despite his isolation, Lucas Blackwood had not forgotten what it meant to be human. The storm raged through the night, its fury shaking the little cabin. Francine woke several times, disoriented and frightened until she remembered where she was. Each time, she saw Lucas sitting awake by the fire, his rifle across his knees, keeping watch. When morning came, the storm had not abated. Wind-driven snow piled against the cabin walls, and Lucas announced grimly that they wouldn't be going anywhere for at least 3 days. "Good news is, we won't have to worry about the Rollins gang in this," he said, returning from checking his horses in the sheltered corral. "Bad news is, we're stuck here together." Francine, sitting at the table with a cup of strong coffee, raised an eyebrow. "Is my company so terrible, Mr. Blackwood?" For the first time, she saw a flicker of what might have been amusement in his eyes. "Not terrible, just not used to it." He hung his snow-dusted coat by the door. "And it's Lucas. Mr. Blackwood makes me look for my father." "Then you must call me Francine," she replied. "If we're to be snowbound together, formality seems rather pointless." He nodded, pouring himself coffee before sitting across from her. "Your arm." Francine flexed it carefully. "Sore but better. Your doctoring skills are impressive. Like I said, war teaches things." He stared into his cup. "Fought with the 1st Minnesota. Saw more than my share of wounds." The mention of the war sparked Francine's curiosity. "That was one of the most decorated units in the Union Army. You were at Gettysburg." Lucas looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "You know about Gettysburg?" "My father was a professor of history at Harvard," Francine explained. "Our home was always full of books and discussions about the war. 3 of my cousins fought for the Union." "Did they come home?" "2 did. 1 didn't." She met his gaze steadily. "Is that why you came west? Because of what you saw in the war?" Lucas's hands tightened around his cup. For a moment, Francine thought he wouldn't answer. "Partly," he finally said. "After what I saw, what I did, I couldn't go back to normal life. Needed space to not forget, but live with it." He stood abruptly. "Need to check our supplies. Storm might last longer than I thought." Francine watched him retreat to the small pantry area, sensing she had touched a nerve. She wouldn't press him further. Everyone carried private wounds, and some ran deeper than others. The day passed slowly. Confined by the storm, they established a cautious rhythm around each other. Lucas occupied himself with small repairs to harnesses and tools, while Francine, having discovered his collection of books, immersed herself in a volume of Thoreau. "You've read all of these?" she asked at one point, gesturing to the shelves. Lucas nodded without looking up from his work. "Not much else to do during winter months." "They're well chosen," Francine observed. "Thoreau, Emerson, Shakespeare, Homer. You have more classics here than some small-town libraries I've visited." "Books don't judge," Lucas said simply. "They don't ask questions or expect anything. They just offer what they have." The insight into his character touched Francine more deeply than she expected. This reclusive man, who had spent decades avoiding human connection, had found companionship in the great minds of literature. By evening, Francine's restlessness had overcome her propriety. "May I help with something?" she asked as Lucas prepared their supper. "I feel useless just sitting here." He hesitated, then gestured to a pot of beans. "You could stir those. Need to thicken up a bit more." Grateful for the task, Francine joined him at the stove. They worked side by side in silence, the small space forcing a proximity that made Lucas noticeably tense. "I won't bite, you know," Francine said gently, glancing up at him. Lucas's hand stilled over the venison he was slicing. "It's not that. It's just been a long time since I shared space with anyone, especially a woman." 20 years, you said." Francine recalled his whispered words from the previous night. "Not by choice at first," Lucas admitted, resuming his work. "When I came west, I thought I'd find a place in one of the mining towns. Maybe start fresh. But the noise, the crowds, it was too much. Reminded me too much of the chaos of battle." He shook his head. "So I kept moving until I found this place. Built the cabin myself. Trapped, hunted, traded for what I needed. Visits to town got less frequent. Years passed. And no one ever came looking for you?" Francine asked. "Family? Friends?" "No family left after the war. Friends." He shrugged. "The kind of friendships forged in battle don't always survive peace. Men want to forget, move on." They ate supper at the small table, the storms howling a constant backdrop to their conversation. Despite his initial reticence, Lucas proved knowledgeable on many subjects, and Francine found herself engaging in the kind of intellectual discourse she had feared she would miss in the frontier territories. "You're well educated for a schoolteacher headed to a mining town," Lucas observed as they discussed the politics of Reconstruction. Francine smiled ruefully. "I attended Radcliffe, studying alongside the Harvard students, though of course not officially recognized. I had hoped to continue my father's work after his death. But," she hesitated, "academia has limited space for women. Teaching school seemed the best way to use my education." "Their loss?" Lucas said simply, and Francine felt a flush of warmth at the unexpected compliment. After supper, as they sat before the fire, Lucas surprised her by pulling out a chessboard. "Do you play?" he asked, setting up the hand-carved pieces. "My father taught me," Francine replied. "Though I warn you, he claimed I was ruthless." A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. "I'll take my chances." The game proved evenly matched, both of them applying strategy and foresight that revealed much about their characters. Lucas played conservatively, protecting his pieces and territory, while Francine employed more daring tactics, willing to sacrifice for position. When Francine finally declared checkmate, Lucas studied the board with genuine admiration. "Your father wasn't wrong. You are ruthless." Francine laughed, the sound filling the cabin with unexpected warmth. "Only at chess, I assure you." Lucas looked up, and for a moment, the years of isolation seemed to fall away from his face. "It's a pleasant sound. Laughter. I'd forgotten." The sudden vulnerability in his expression stirred something in Francine, a mixture of compassion and an emotion she wasn't ready to name. She busied herself resetting the chess pieces. "Another game?" she asked, her voice slightly unsteady. Lucas shook his head. Best save something for tomorrow. Storm's not letting up anytime soon. They prepared for sleep as they had the night before, with Lucas insisting Francine take the bed while he made do with blankets by the fire. But unlike the previous night, Francine didn't fall asleep immediately. She lay awake, listening to the storm and thinking about the solitary man who had saved her life. What series of events had led him to such complete isolation? The war explained part of it, but she sensed there was more to Lucas Blackwood's story than battlefield trauma. Whatever it was, it had convinced him that solitude was preferable to human connection. Yet he had not hesitated to take her in, to share his home and his limited supplies. Somewhere beneath the gruff exterior and self-imposed exile beat a heart that remembered compassion. With that thought warming her more effectively than the quilt, Francine finally drifted to sleep. The second day of the storm brought no relief from the weather but a noticeable thaw in Lucas's reserve. He showed Francine how he cured meat for the winter months and taught her to identify the different animal tracks visible in the snow around the cabin. "That's a rabbit," he explained, pointing to a distinctive pattern near a stand of pine trees. "Good eating if you can catch them. And those are deer tracks, see how they're deeper on this side. Buck with an uneven gait, probably from an old injury." Francine marveled at his ability to read the stories written in the snow. "You've learned to see what others miss." Lucas glanced at her. "When you're alone, you notice things. Patterns. Changes. It's how you stay alive." "Is that all you've wanted? Just to stay alive?" The question slipped out before Francine could reconsider its boldness. Lucas was silent for a long moment, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "For a long time, yes. After the war, after everything. Just surviving seemed enough." He turned to face her fully. "What about you? Is teaching school in Helena just about staying alive?" The perceptiveness of his question caught Francine off guard. "I suppose I've never thought of it that way. I've always believed education was my calling. But recently..." She hesitated. "Recently I've wondered if I'm running towards something or away from it." "What would you be running from?" Francine pulled her borrowed coat tighter around her shoulders. "Expectations. Limitations. In Boston, a woman of my age and situation faces certain pressures. Marriage to a suitable man, maintaining social standing, accepting constraints on ambition and intellect. So you chose the frontier instead." "I chose freedom," Francine corrected. "Or at least the possibility of it." Lucas's expression softened with understanding. "We're not so different, then. Both looking for space to be ourselves, away from what others think we should be." The insight created a moment of connection between them that transcended their brief acquaintance. They stood together in the snow, two souls who had rejected the paths laid out for them in search of something more authentic. Inside the cabin once more, Lucas surprised Francine by retrieving a fiddle from a trunk. "You play?" she asked, delighted by this unexpected revelation. "Used to, in the evenings after chores, or at gatherings before the war." He ran his fingers over the instrument almost reverently. "Haven't played much lately. No audience but the horses." "Would you play now?" Francine asked softly. "I'd like to hear it." Lucas hesitated, then nodded. He positioned the fiddle under his chin, closed his eyes for a moment, and then began to play. The melody that filled the cabin was hauntingly beautiful, a folk tune Francine didn't recognize, but that spoke of longing and memory. Lucas played with surprising grace, his calloused fingers moving deftly across the strings, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm. Francine watched, transfixed. In that moment, Lucas Blackwood was transformed. The tension left his shoulders, the hard lines of his face softened, and she glimpsed the man he might have been before war and solitude had reshaped him. When the song ended, the The silence seemed almost sacred. Francine found her eyes were damp. "That was beautiful," she said quietly. "What is it called?" "The Wanderer's Return," Lucas replied, lowering the fiddle. "My father taught it to me. Said it was old when his grandfather learned it." "It sounds like coming home," Francine observed. Lucas looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Yes, that's what it's meant to evoke. Do you ever think about it? Going home. Home ceased to exist for me a long time ago." He carefully returned the fiddle to its case. "What about you? Is Boston still home?" Francine considered the question. "I'm not sure anymore. It's where I'm from, where I grew up, but—" She shook her head. "Home should be where you can be yourself without apology. I'm not certain I've found that place yet. Perhaps Helena will be that for you." "Perhaps," Francine agreed, though without conviction. The truth was, in the few days she had spent in Lucas's cabin, she had felt a freedom and acceptance that had eluded her in Boston society. Here, there were no judgments about her unmarried status, no raised eyebrows at her intellectual interests, no subtle reminders to moderate her opinions. Here, with this solitary man who had carved a life from wilderness, she was simply Francine, not a spinster, not a bluestocking, not a disappointment to societal expectations. The revelation was as unsettling as it was liberating. That evening, as they shared another meal, Francine asked the question that had been forming in her mind since she first arrived. "Lucas, what happened 20 years ago? What made you choose this life?" The silence that followed was so complete that Francine could hear the logs settling in the fire. Just as she began to regret her boldness, Lucas spoke. "After the war, I tried to go back, tried to fit into normal life. Got married in '57 to a girl I'd known before I enlisted. Eleanor." His voice softened on the name. "We came west together, looking for a fresh start. Settled near Helena at first, where I worked as a farrier." He paused, his gaze fixed on something Francine couldn't see. "We had a daughter, Sarah, born in the spring of '58. Eleanor died bringing her into the world." Francine's heart constricted. "I'm so sorry." Lucas acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "I did my best with Sarah. She was everything. Smart, stubborn, full of life. We got by, the two of us, for almost a year. Then cholera swept through the settlement." He didn't need to finish. Francine reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You lost her too. 3 days from the first symptoms to the end. Nothing I could do." His voice was flat, but his hand trembled beneath hers. "After burying her, I couldn't stay there, couldn't bear the pity, the reminders. So I rode until I found this place, built the cabin, and just stopped living," Francine said softly. "Stopped trying to build something that could be taken away," he corrected. "Figured if I didn't care about anything, I couldn't lose anything. And has it worked? Not caring." Lucas finally met her gaze, and the raw honesty in his eyes stole Francine's breath. "Until 3 nights ago, I thought it had." The implication of his words hung between them, charged with possibility and danger. Francine was acutely aware that they were alone, isolated by the storm, their lives temporarily entwined by circumstance. She withdrew her hand slowly. "I should check my arm. The bandage needs changing." Lucas nodded, accepting the retreat. "I'll help." He gathered the medical supplies and sat beside her on the edge of the bed. With gentle hands, he unwrapped the bandage, revealing the healing wound beneath. "Looking better," he observed. "Clean, no infection. You're lucky." "Yes," Francine agreed, watching his face as he worked. "I am." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition of the fragile connection forming despite the barriers each had constructed around their hearts. Lucas cleared his throat and resumed his task, applying a fresh bandage with careful precision. Should be able to travel in a few days, once the storm clears. Get you to Silver Creek, then on to Helena. Yes, Francine said again, but this time the word carried a note of uncertainty. The prospect of continuing to Helena, which had been her fixed purpose for months, suddenly seemed less compelling than it had before. When Lucas finished, he moved away quickly, as if afraid to remain too close. He busied himself with preparations for the night, banking the fire and checking that the shutters were secure against the still howling wind. Francine watched him, struck by how his presence filled the small cabin not just physically, but with an energy she found increasingly difficult to ignore. This man, who had retreated from the world to nurse his wounds in solitude, possessed a quiet strength and dignity that drew her like a moth to flame. It was madness, of course. They were strangers thrown together by circumstance. In a few days, the storm would pass, and they would return to their separate paths, he to his solitude, she to her new life in Helena. Yet as she settled beneath the quilt that night, listening to Lucas's steady breathing across the room, Francine couldn't help but wonder if fate had more in mind than a temporary shelter from the storm. The third day dawned with a temporary lull in the blizzard. Though snow still fell, the wind had died down enough for Lucas to properly tend to his horses and check the perimeter of his property. "Storm's weakening," he announced upon returning, stamping snow from his boots. "Another day, maybe two, and the trail to Silver Creek should be passable." Francine nodded, ignoring the unexpected pang his words caused. "That's good news." Lucas hung his coat by the door, his movements measured and precise. "Once we reach town, Sheriff Donovan can arrange an escort to Helena. Stage won't be running for a while after this storm, but there's usually someone willing to guide travelers for the right price." "You seem eager to be rid of me," Francine observed, attempting a lightness she didn't feel. Lucas looked up sharply. "That's not," he stopped, taking a breath. "That's not true. But you have a position waiting, a new life to begin. And I have this." He gestured to the cabin around them. "Is this enough?" Francine asked, the question sincere rather than challenging. "This solitude, this separation from human connection, is it really enough for you?" Lucas moved to the fire, adding a log before answering. "It was. For 20 years it was. And now?" He turned to face her, his expression conflicted. "Now I don't know. Having you here these past days, it's reminded me of things I thought I'd forgotten, or wanted to forget." "What things?" Francine pressed gently. "Conversation, laughter, the simple comfort of another presence." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "But it doesn't change anything. You have your life ahead of you. I made my choice a long time ago." "Choices can be unmade," Francine said. "Lives can change direction. Not easily. Not without cost." Lucas's tone was final, closing the discussion. "I need to check our supplies. Storm's not over yet." As he retreated to the pantry area, Francine remained by the fire, troubled by the conversation. Lucas was right, of course. Their paths had crossed by chance, not design. She had responsibilities waiting in Helena, a contract signed, expectations to fulfill. Yet in the few days they had spent together, something had awakened in her, a recognition that life could offer connections more meaningful than social acceptance, more fulfilling than professional accomplishment. The day passed with a subtle tension between them. They spoke of practical matters with supplies, meal preparation, the condition of Francine's arm, but avoided the undercurrent that ran beneath their interactions. By evening, the storm had intensified again, wind shrieking around the cabin like a living thing. Francine sat at the table, attempting to mend a tear in her dress, while Lucas cleaned his rifle nearby. "We'll need to sleep in shifts tonight," Lucas said abruptly, breaking a long silence. Francine looked up from her stitching. Why? Storm like this, wolves get desperate. Might come close to the cabin, try for the horses. He checked the rifle's action with practiced hands. Need to keep watch. I can take a turn, Francine offered. I know how to use a rifle. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Do you now? My father believed women should know how to defend themselves, Francine explained. He taught all 3 of his daughters to shoot. I'm quite proficient. A hint of amusement touched Lucas's features. Somehow that doesn't surprise me. He considered her offer. All right, I'll take first watch, wake you in 4 hours. True to his word, Lucas gently roused Francine in the deepest part of the night. The cabin was cold now, the fire burned down to embers. Any trouble? She asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she rose from the bed. Lucas shook his head. Heard wolves about an hour ago, but they didn't come close. Still, better safe than sorry. He handed her the rifle. You remember how to use this? Francine took the weapon, checking it with competent hands. Yes, and I won't hesitate if something threatens the horses. Lucas nodded approvingly. Good. Wake me at first light, or sooner if you hear anything unusual. He settled onto the bed, not bothering to remove his boots. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Francine added wood to the fire, then took up position near the window. The storm continued unabated, snow swirling in the darkness like restless spirits. Occasionally, the wind would shift, revealing glimpses of a night sky studded with stars of impossible brilliance. As she maintained her vigil, Francine found her gaze drawn repeatedly to the sleeping man. In repose, the hard lines of Lucas's face softened, making him appear younger, less burdened by his past. She wondered what he had looked like before grief and isolation had carved their signatures into his features. Handsome, she decided, not in the polished way of Boston society men, but with the authentic appeal of someone shaped by purpose and principle rather than convention. The night passed slowly. Twice, Francine heard wolves howling in the distance, but they never approached the cabin. As promised, she woke Lucas at first light, when the storm finally began to abate. He rose immediately, fully alert. Everything quiet? Yes, the wolves stayed away, and the horses seemed calm. Lucas moved to the window, surveying the transformed landscape. Snow had drifted against the cabin, nearly reaching the windowsill in places. Going to take some digging to get out, he observed. But the worst is over. Skies clearing to the west. They worked together after breakfast, Lucas breaking trail while Francine shoveled snow away from the cabin door. The physical labor was exhausting but oddly satisfying. By midday, they had cleared enough space around the cabin and corral for movement. Trail to Silver Creek won't be passable until tomorrow at the earliest, Lucas announced, leaning on his shovel. Snow's too deep in the passes. Francine nodded, brushing snow from her borrowed coat. One more day, then. Their eyes met in silent acknowledgement of the dwindling time. One more day of this strange, isolated intimacy before reality reclaimed them. After a simple lunch, Lucas surprised Francine by producing a deck of playing cards. Thought you might like to learn poker, he said. Passes the time. They sat at the table, and Lucas patiently explained the rules and the hierarchy of hands. Francine proved a quick study, soon giving him genuine competition. You're a natural card player, Lucas observed after she won her third hand. Got the face for it, never show what you're thinking. Francine smiled. My mother always said it was unladylike to be too expressive. For once, her lessons prove useful. Your mother sounds formidable. She was, Francine agreed. Still is, I suppose, though we've grown apart since my father's death. She never understood my desire for education or independence. In her view, a woman's highest achievement is a suitable marriage. And you disagreed. Francine dealt the next hand before answering. I've never been opposed to marriage in principle. Only to the idea that it should be a woman's sole ambition, her only measure of worth. She arranged her cards thoughtfully. I always thought, if I married, it would be to someone who valued my mind as much as any other quality. A rare man in my experience, Lucas commented. Yes, Francine agreed. Which is why I remain unmarried at the advanced age of 28. Lucas's expression softened. Not so advanced. And better unmarried than bound to someone who doesn't see your value. The simple validation warmed Francine more than she expected. How often had she defended her single status to family and acquaintances in Boston, only to be met with pitying looks or well-meaning advice. What about you? She asked. After Eleanor, did you never consider remarrying? Lucas set down his cards, his gaze distant. For a time, I couldn't imagine it. The grief was too raw. Then after Sarah. He shook his head. By the time I might have been ready, I was already here, already apart from that kind of life. And now? Francine's question hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Lucas met her eyes directly. Now I'm a man who spent 20 years alone, set in my ways, rough around all the edges. Not much of a prospect for anyone, let alone someone like you. Someone like me? Educated, refined, young enough to start fresh. Francine laid her cards down, suddenly uninterested in the game. You make many assumptions, Lucas Blackwood, about yourself and about me. Am I wrong? Yes, she said simply. You see yourself as defined by your past, by your isolation. I see a man of principle and compassion. A man who took in a stranger without hesitation. Who tends wounds and plays the fiddle and carves chess pieces by hand. Who reads philosophy and history and can name every star in the winter sky. Lucas looked away, discomfited by her assessment. You've known me 4 days. Sometimes 4 days is enough to see what matters. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Lucas gathered the cards, his movements deliberate. We should rest while we can, he said. Tomorrow will be a long day if the weather holds. Francine recognized the retreat but didn't press. The seed had been planted, the acknowledgement that what had grown between them in these few days might be worth exploring further. Whether it would take root or wither in the harsh reality beyond the cabin remained to be seen. That night, their last together if the weather permitted travel the next day, neither slept well. Francine lay awake in the bed, listening to Lucas shift restlessly on his blankets by the fire. The cabin seemed charged with unresolved tension, with words unsaid and feelings unexplored. Just before dawn, Francine rose, unable to pretend sleep any longer. She added wood to the dying fire, the sound rousing Lucas. You should be resting, he said, sitting up. I couldn't sleep. Francine remained by the fire, watching the flames catch on the fresh wood. Too many thoughts. Lucas stood, moving to join her by the hearth. In the flickering light, his expression was a study in conflict, desire warring with restraint, hope with resignation. Francine, he began, then stopped, as if unsure how to continue. She turned to face him fully. Whatever you're afraid to say, Lucas, just say it. We may not have another chance. He drew a deep breath. I've been alone so long. I've forgotten how to be anything else. But having you here, it's like waking up after a long sleep. And the thought of going back to that silence, that emptiness. Then don't, Francine said softly. Don't go back to it. What choice do I have? You have a life waiting in Helena. Responsibilities, plans. Plans can change. Francine took a step closer to him. What if I didn't go to Helena? What if I stayed in Silver Creek? It must need a teacher as much as Helena does. Lucas's expression transformed with astonishment. You would consider that? Giving up your position for? What? A chance on something you can't be sure of? Isn't that what life is? Taking chances on things we can't be sure of. Francine smiled gently. Besides, I was going to Helena seeking something: purpose, independence, a place to belong. What if I found those things already? Just not where I expected. Lucas reached out tentatively, his hand stopping just short of touching her face. You hardly know me. I know enough, Francine replied. I know you're a man of honor and kindness. I know you've suffered and survived. I know when you play the fiddle, you close your eyes and become someone else entirely. And I know I want to discover what else there is to learn about Lucas Blackwood. With a hesitancy born of long disuse, Lucas finally allowed his fingers to brush her cheek. I'm afraid, he admitted, the words barely audible. Afraid to want something again. Someone. I know, Francine whispered, covering his hand with her own. So am I. But I'm more afraid of walking away from this without knowing what it could become. The first kiss was gentle, tentative, the kiss of a man relearning forgotten language. Francine responded with equal gentleness, allowing him to set the pace of this rediscovery. When they parted, Lucas rested his forehead against hers, his breath uneven. 20 years, he murmured. 20 years without holding someone this way. Was it worth the wait? Francine asked, a smile in her voice. His answering smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude in an instant. Yes, though I wouldn't recommend the method. They remained by the fire as dawn broke, talking of practical matters now. Silver Creek had no formal school, but Lucas thought the town council would be eager to establish one. The population had grown in recent years, with more families settling in the area. There's a vacant building that used to be the assayer's office, he said. Could be converted to a schoolhouse with some work. And where would I live? Francine asked, her eyes twinkling. The town must have a boarding house or hotel. Lucas hesitated, then committed himself. You could stay here, if you wanted. Are you proposing, Mr. Blackwood? Francine's tone was light, but her heart raced at the implication. Not yet, Lucas replied seriously. When I do, it will be properly, with a ring and on one knee. But I am asking if you'd consider making this cabin your home while we discover what this could become. The honesty of his answer touched Francine deeply. No pretense, no false promises, just the sincere offer of a shared journey. Yes, she said simply. I would consider that. Very seriously. The sun rose fully, illuminating a world transformed by snow. It would be difficult travel to Silver Creek, but both now faced the prospect with different emotions than they had the day before. They prepared for the journey methodically, packing provisions and extra blankets. Lucas insisted Francine wear his heaviest coat, wrapping a woolen scarf around her neck with tender care. The horses are strong, but it will still take most of the day, he explained as they mounted. Stay close to me. There are drifts that can swallow a horse if you wander off the trail. Francine nodded, settling into the saddle of the mare Lucas had prepared for her. I trust you to lead the way. As they set out from the cabin, Francine looked back once at the small structure that had sheltered them through the storm. For days ago, it had been simply a haven from death. Now it represented something else entirely, the possibility of a new beginning. Lucas noticed her glance. Having second thoughts? No, Francine replied truthfully. Just marking the moment. Sometimes the most important journeys start from the most unexpected places. Lucas reached across the space between their horses, taking her gloved hand in his. Sometimes they do. The trail to Silver Creek proved as challenging as Lucas had predicted. In places, the snow reached the horses' bellies, forcing them to forge a path with sheer strength. In others, hidden ice made footing treacherous. They spoke little during the journey, focused on navigating the difficult terrain. Yet there was comfort in the silence, now a shared purpose that required no words. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Silver Creek came into view below them. It was larger than Francine had expected, a proper town with several streets radiating from a central square. Smoke rose from chimneys, and despite the snow, there was evidence of activity. Home to about 500 souls now, Lucas said. It's grown since I first came to these parts. Mining's been good, and there's enough ranching and farming to support those who don't work the claims. As they descended toward the town, Francine noticed Lucas straightening in his saddle, adjusting his hat, becoming more conscious of his appearance. "Nervous?" she asked gently. He glanced at her with a rueful smile. "Been a long time since I showed my face in town for more than supplies. And never with a companion. Will they remember you?" "Some will. Sheriff Donovan for certain. We served together in the war before coming west. He's tried to draw me back into town life over the years. Without success, clearly. Until now," Lucas agreed, his expression softening as he looked at her. Their entrance into Silver Creek drew curious glances. Lucas Blackwood was evidently known, but his presence with a well-dressed woman caused speculation. They rode directly to the sheriff's office, where a broad-shouldered man with a silver-streaked beard emerged at the sound of their approach. "Lucas Blackwood," the man exclaimed. "Twice in 1 month? The world must be ending." Lucas dismounted, helping Francine down before turning to the sheriff. "Frank, need your help." Sheriff Donovan's gaze shifted to Francine, curiosity evident in his expression. "I can see that. And who might this lady be?" "Francine Dawson," she introduced herself, extending a gloved hand. "I was on the Helena stage when it was attacked by bandits. Mr. Blackwood found me and provided shelter during the storm." Understanding dawned in the sheriff's eyes. "The Rollins gang hit another stage? When?" "4 days ago," Lucas replied. "Left everyone else dead. Miss Dawson escaped into the woods, wounded." The sheriff's expression darkened. "Been trying to catch those bastards for months. Never leave witnesses." He looked at Francine with newfound respect. "You're lucky to be alive, madam." "I'm well aware," Francine assured him. "Mr. Blackwood saved my life." Sheriff Donovan glanced between them, sensing there was more to the story than a simple rescue. "Well, you'd better come inside. Both of you look half frozen, and I want details about these bandits." Inside the warm office, they provided full descriptions of the attackers. The sheriff took detailed notes, nodding grimly. "That's them all right. Caleb Rollins and his brothers. They've been working this territory since last fall, getting bolder with each robbery." He set down his pencil. "I'll wire the territorial marshal. With your testimony, Miss Dawson, we might finally have enough to bring them in." "I'm willing to provide whatever information helps," Francine assured him. "Good. Now, about getting you to Helena." The sheriff began. "Actually," Francine interrupted, "I'm considering remaining in Silver Creek. I understand there's no school here." Sheriff Donovan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "No formal school, no. Reverend Miller's wife teaches some of the younger children in the church, but there's at least 30 school-age children in town now." He glanced at Lucas. "This you're doing?" Lucas shrugged, but the slight smile that touched his lips was answer enough. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. Well, 20 years in that cabin, and it takes a blizzard and a Boston schoolteacher to bring you back to civilization." Don't get ahead of yourself, Frank, Lucas warned, though without heat. Miss Dawson, the sheriff continued, if you're serious about teaching here, I can call a town meeting tomorrow. The council's been talking about establishing a proper school for over a year now. Just needed the right teacher to come along. I'm entirely serious, Francine confirmed, though I would need accommodations until more permanent arrangements can be made. Mrs. Sullivan runs a good boarding house, Sheriff Donovan began, then caught Lucas's expression. Or, perhaps you have other ideas about that. Miss Dawson will be staying at my cabin for the time being, Lucas stated, his tone brooking no argument. The sheriff's eyebrows climbed higher. Will she now? Yes, Francine confirmed calmly. Mr. Blackwood has generously offered his home while I establish myself in Silver Creek. Sheriff Donovan looked between them, amusement and genuine pleasure mingling in his expression. Well, I'll be damned. Never thought I'd see the day. He shook his head. The town gossips are going to have a field day with this. Let them talk, Lucas said. Francine and I understand each other. The simple statement, delivered with quiet confidence, warmed Francine from within. Yes, they did understand each other, two people who had, in their different ways, stepped outside society's expectations to forge their own paths. They spent the remainder of the day making arrangements. A telegram was sent to the school board in Helena, explaining Francine's change of plans and recommending another candidate who had applied for the position. Sheriff Donovan introduced Francine to several influential town members, including Reverend Miller and his wife, who were delighted at the prospect of a proper school. By evening, word had spread throughout Silver Creek. Lucas Blackwood, the hermit who had lived alone in the wilderness for 20 years, had returned to town with a beautiful, educated woman who would become their new teacher. You've caused quite a stir, Lucas observed as they sat in the town's small restaurant, finishing a hot meal. Half the town has found a reason to walk past the window in the last hour. Francine smiled, unperturbed by the attention. Small towns run on curiosity. It will settle once they grow used to us. Us, Lucas repeated, the word carrying weight. There is an U.S. Then? Francine reached across the table, taking his hand. Yes, Lucas, there is an U.S. If you want there to be. His fingers tightened around hers. I do. More than I thought possible a week ago. The ride back to the cabin in the gathering dusk was peaceful, the horses finding the trail more easily now that it had been broken. Stars emerged in a sky cleared by the storm, and a nearly full moon rose, casting silver light across the snow-covered landscape. It's beautiful, Francine observed, gazing at the pristine wilderness around them. I understand why you chose this place. Lucas nodded. For a long time I saw only the isolation, the safety of being apart. Never really looked at the beauty anymore. He glanced at her, his expression soft in the moonlight. You've changed that. Changed how I see everything. When they reached the cabin, Lucas built up the fire while Francine prepared a simple supper from their provisions. The domestic routine felt natural, as if they had been sharing this space for years rather than days. After they ate, Lucas retrieved his fiddle again. Any requests? He asked, a playfulness in his tone that Francine found endearing. The Wanderer's Return, she said without hesitation. It seems appropriate. Lucas played, the melody filling the cabin with its themes of journey and homecoming. When he finished, he set the fiddle aside and crossed to where Francine sat by the fire. I want to do this properly, he said, taking her hands in his. I know it's fast, impossibly fast by any normal standard. But nothing about this has been normal from the start. Lucas, Francine began, but he gently silenced her with a finger to her lips. Let me say this, please. He took a deep breath. For 20 years, I've existed in a kind of half-life. Not living, just surviving. Then you appeared, wounded and determined, and something woke up in me that I thought had died with Eleanor and Sarah. He knelt before her, still holding her hands. I'm not asking for promises yet, just for time to see if what's begun between us can grow into something lasting. Time to relearn how to be part of the world, part of a we instead of just an I. Tears pricked at Francine's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes to time, to possibilities, to whatever this becomes. Lucas's smile transformed his face, erasing the last vestiges of the solitary man who had lifted her into his cabin just days before. He rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. This kiss was different from their first, confident, thorough, a promise rather than a question. Francine responded in kind, her arms twining around his neck as she surrendered to the unexpected joy of finding connection where she had least expected it. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Lucas, still insisting on taking the floor despite Francine's protests, he asked the question that had lingered in his mind. Are you sure you won't regret it? Giving up Helena, the position you came west for? Francine, sitting on the edge of the bed, considered her answer carefully. I came west seeking something, Lucas. A purpose, yes, but also freedom. A place where I could be valued for my mind and abilities rather than judged for my unmarried state or unconventional ideas. She smiled, the firelight catching in her hair. I think I've found that here, not just with you, though you're a significant part of it. Silver Creek needs a teacher, someone who can help shape its future through its children. That's the purpose I sought. And as for the rest, her expression softened. I found something I wasn't even looking for, something rare and precious. How could I possibly regret that? Lucas nodded, satisfied with her answer. We'll make it work, then. The school, the town, us. All of it. Yes, Francine agreed. We will. As spring transformed the Montana landscape, melting snow and coaxing wildflowers from the earth, other transformations took place as well. The former assayer's office became a schoolhouse, with Lucas and other town men contributing labor to convert the space. Desks were built, books ordered, and by April, 27 students of varying ages gathered each day to learn under Francine's guidance. Lucas found himself drawn back into community life, first through Francine, then through his own rediscovered skills. His knowledge of horses made him valuable to ranchers and travelers alike, and he began spending several days each week in town, shoeing horses and repairing tack. The cabin, too, underwent changes. A proper bedroom was added, along with a larger kitchen and a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains. In June, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the days stretched long with sunlight, Lucas and Francine were married in a simple ceremony beside the creek that gave the town its name. Sheriff Donovan stood as witness, along with Reverend Miller and half the townspeople, who had embraced their unlikely romance with enthusiasm. I never thought I'd see this day, Frank Donovan said at the small reception afterward, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. You, of all people, finding happiness again. Lucas's gaze sought Francine across the room, where she was deep in conversation with several of her students' mothers. Neither did I. Thought that part of life was over for me. Just goes to show, the sheriff mused. You never can tell what's waiting around the next bend in the trail. That night, in their cabin, now truly their home, Lucas presented Francine with a gift. A small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers and vines. It's beautiful, she said, tracing the patterns with her fingers. Open it, Lucas urged. Inside lay a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When Francine opened it, she found a tiny pencil sketch of their cabin on one side. The other side is empty, Lucas explained. Thought we could fill it with whatever comes next in our story. Tears shimmered in Francine's eyes as she closed the locket, and allowed Lucas to fasten it around her neck. "It's perfect. Thank you." He drew her into his arms, still marveling at the miracle of her presence in his life. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for finding me when I didn't know I was lost." The years that followed brought changes and challenges, as all years do. The school grew, eventually requiring a larger building and a second teacher. Lucas's reputation as a horseman spread throughout the territory, bringing work and recognition. In the spring of 1880, their family expanded with the birth of a daughter, whom they named Sarah Eleanor, honoring the past while embracing the future. 2 years later, a son joined the family, bringing new joy and purpose to their lives. Silver Creek flourished, becoming a thriving community where education was valued and culture encouraged. Francine established a town library, while Lucas taught fiddle to anyone willing to learn, leading to regular musical gatherings that became a town tradition. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Francine would find Lucas on the porch, gazing at the stars with an expression of wonder. "What are you thinking about?" she would ask, settling beside him, and Lucas would smile, drawing her close. "About how a stagecoach robbery, a blizzard, and a wounded schoolteacher changed everything. About how sometimes the worst days of your life lead to the best. No regrets, then?" Francine would tease, though she knew the answer. "Just one," Lucas would reply, his eyes twinkling. "That I wasted 20 years before finding you." "Not wasted," Francine would correct gently. "Those years made you who you are. And I happen to love who you are, Lucas Blackwood." And as they sat together beneath the vast Montana sky, Lucas would reflect that his solitary cabin, once a fortress against pain, had become something he never expected. The center of a life filled with love, purpose, and second chances. For a man who had once whispered, "I haven't held a woman in 20 years," as he carried a wounded stranger across his threshold, it was a transformation beyond imagining, proof that even the most isolated heart could find its way home, if only given the chance to try.